science, through social science. And so for that, we are grateful. And this session is called Faith, Power, and Possibility, and it's actually moderated by someone who's also someone I deeply love, who's a personal hero, Shiro, who unfortunately was not born and raised in Queens, but now lives in Queens, but reps Brooklyn, Bensonhurst specifically. And this is Abir Qawas. Many of you might be familiar with her work at CUNY Clear. Abir Qawas is a Palestinian-American community organizer from Brooklyn. She spent her life on the front lines of justice for Arab and Muslim communities, from challenging unlawful policing and surveillance to advocating for immigration reform and fighting Islamophobia. Abir's work has shaped grassroots movements across New York City. She has served as the advocacy director at the Arab American Association of New York, and later as the New York City advocacy specialist with the Campaign to Take on Hate under the National Network of Arab American Communities. Today she continues her justice journey. She actually was in South Africa, where she completed a master's degree in Islamic liberation theology. So ask her all about it. She's done seminars on Islamic liberation. So I'm so excited for the conversation that's about to ensue between these two. Please welcome her to the stage. She's also my neighbor, which is her biggest claim to fame.
Thank you.
Oh,
there we go.
And then this one.
Cool. Oh, that's for Dalia. Okay. Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Salam Dalia.
Salam alaikum, Abir. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, same. Nice to meet you, but also just such an honor to meet you and be in conversation with you. So Dalia and I didn't get like a chance to check in, but I know at conferences everybody hates to have their bio read, and it never feels like a true representation of what you do. So I want to kind of just first start with the first question of you explaining to people a little bit about your career and what you've done, but specifically how faith has been rooted as part of the path of your career.
Thank you so much. And it's such an honor for me to be in conversation with you and with all of you today. Thank you for spending this gorgeous afternoon here having this conversation. My career has been a very windy and unpredictable series of coincidences and divine interventions. I started out miles and miles away from where I am today, light years away. I did my undergrad in chemical engineering with a minor in African studies focused on Arabic. And while doing that, I was also doing activism in my college community on Muslims and on various Muslim causes at the time, namely Bosnia, Palestine, and lifting the sanctions against Iraq. Those were at the time, and in many cases still are, the causes that were dearest to my heart. So it was sort of like living two lives, where I was, learning about transport phenomena and chemical, compounds by day, and then protesting Israeli occupation by night, kind of thing. After I graduated from college, I joined the corporate world and kind of lived a pretty normal life. I got married, I had my first child, and then 9/11 hit. And like many people who lived through that horrific era and event, my life was changed, and it reignited in me a need to have a public voice and help to shape and educate people's understanding of who Islam and Muslims were. Now, that's kind of the easy telling of the story, the part of the story that I can put in a resume, but what was going on inside, what I was dealing with during that time was a deep depression that I didn't even know how to label it at the time. But it was this feeling of being completely alienated from everyone around me. I had just moved to a new city on September 12th, 2001. I didn't know anybody. I felt very unsafe. I had an infant at home. I just felt isolated in every possible way you could feel isolated. Not just as a new mother, but someone who was in a new city, didn't know anyone, and a whole new world, a new country, a country that I didn't recognize, where for the first time in my life I was afraid to be known as a Muslim in those early days. And I just fell into this sense of like despair. There were all these laws being passed. If you remember, a lot of you are probably maybe weren't even born, but those of us who lived through it as conscious beings remember the terror of it, and especially here in New York. Now, I was in Pittsburgh, but same kind of feeling. The climate was so charged and so insecure for communities like ours. And at that time, I was listening to a series on the Sirah, on the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It was gifted to me from my halakha group in my old city, who I relied on for my social support, and I was separated from all my friends. So I was listening to this series on the Sirah, on the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And the story of Ta'if came up in this series, and I was really like, it had this like new meaning for me, where Rasulullah ﷺ hiked in the mountains for 10 days. And these are the parts of the Sirah we kind of gloss over. He didn't sort of just like walk for 2 hours. He hiked for 10 days in the mountains to get to Ta'if from Mecca, to give these people the most precious gift you can give anyone, which is the truth. And after that difficult trip and that difficult journey that he had taken, they rejected and ridiculed him. And just to add insult to injury, on his way out, he was pelted by basically street criminals for a path that he was walking for 3 miles. So it wasn't like 10 minutes of pelting. It probably lasted around an hour of just being pelted, and he was so bloodied that the blood from his head reached and crusted his sandals. And in that place of harm and hurt, and he later told Aisha radiallahu anha that it was the worst day of his life. Worse than all the wars and the defeats and everything else that had happened. It was that day, Ta'if was the worst day of his life. And when he was in that place of harm and hurt and sadness and rejection and physical pain, he was asked in that moment, Allah is asking, if you want the 2 mountains that the city is sitting in the middle of to be crushed, so that they would be destroyed for what they've done to you. And he refuses, right? He says no, because their progeny may be believers. And what that said to me was this, that my sense of despair and anger and at that time, Rasulullah was being insulted, like by the highest level of sort of influence in government and in religion. And I felt so angry on his behalf. And my sense of anger and despair was so different from how he responded to the exact same circumstances, actually far worse than mine. And I thought, I am claiming to be his follower and someone who loves him, and yet am I making him proud right now? In my sense of isolation and wanting to just hunker down. And so it was this story and And it was my faith that got me out of that mindset of wanting to build bunkers to wanting to build bridges. And as a result, I went from this sense of being very afraid and very alienated to applying for this position at the Islamic Center at the time, which was outreach coordinator, which I immediately got because no one else applied. No one else was crazy enough to do that job at the time. And then I promoted myself to outreach director immediately. So that was my title. And I just started going around responding to the requests that we were getting at the time to educate the community, the greater, the wider society about Islam and Muslims.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. I feel very touched listening to that because I've never thought of like looking at the society that we're in as like looking at Ta'if. But I do feel like it's very relevant to the moment. I mean, I was looking at the board over there that was asking people how their heart was, and there was a lot of lack of hope that was shown. And I think a lot of people are really struggling to know how to be in the society at the moment.
Right.
That is literally feels like a ta'if against us. And I know like in the time that you kind of came into this work, it also felt like that. It was like Iraq and Bosnia, and people were really outraged, but I would also say collectively in the country, maybe we didn't feel that sense of outrage. And today, I really want to ask you about how you feel about this moment. Because I'm sure a lot has changed in terms of public perception of Muslims, of Islam, of the issues that we care about, like Palestine, like Sudan, like the genocides and the wars that have happened to our communities where a lot of our people have come from. So in this moment, what do you feel is the direction, that people should look for in terms of like public advocacy, given all of the shifts of the moment, and maybe how you incorporate that into the work that you do? And sorry, I'm going a little bit off the cuff. I'm trying to combine some questions, if that's okay.
No, my answers are so long-winded. I don't blame you. So I want to say that the moment we're in is both extremely familiar and yet so unprecedented at the same time. Because we have seen genocide before. I mean, anyone who lived through the Bosnia genocide, the Rwanda genocide, we've seen what it looks like. We've enabled it before. Of course, the history of this country, genocide is baked into the ground that we are right here standing on. So those things are heart-wrenchingly familiar. What is actually different is that we have people, like Ms. Rai's our sister now, who converted to Islam by watching people endure unbelievable suffering with so much dignity through social media. And that phenomena has never existed that I'm aware of, where the suffering of, say, the Palestinian people, which has always been the case, has been like televised in such real time, day in and day out, where their humanity was forced on the public. They couldn't take that away from them anymore. And now you have voices speaking up and aware of this suffering that has always been there, that have never existed before. I think that there are reasons to hope. And I'll tell you, the Quran for me is what I always pray is the spring of my heart and the light of my chest. And that which takes away my grief, as the Prophet ﷺ would pray. And I was studying this morning, actually, right before I went to the airport, Surah Taha with my teacher, Sheikh Muhammad Majid, and we were just talking about the first few ayahs, and as anyone who's familiar with the surah, Taha, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى. طه, we did not send down the Quran upon you so that you may find distress, or so that you may be distressed or overwhelmed or exhausted. إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى. It is just a reminder for those who are God conscious. And what this reminds us of in this moment is that we are not given the trials that we have. We are not given the identities that we hold. We are not given the guidelines and the boundaries that we hold sacred as Muslims so that we may have distress. Instead, tazkira, right? It is a reminder for those who have God consciousness, which means we are being called back to our fitrah, to our natural disposition. So what we were talking about this morning is that even though it feels like we are all swimming upstream against the tide, we are actually the ones swimming with the tide towards salvation. And to kind of reframe things for ourselves, this is the book calling us back to who we truly are, to our natural, authentic selves. And so in this moment, as difficult as it feels, it's because the world is not an easy place. Not because we are archaic, backwards, or deserving of this kind of suffering. And I mean, I'm stating things that may seem very obvious, but it's very easy to fall into the dominant mindset that something must be wrong with me if I am suffering this much. Something must be wrong with us as a collective if we are suffering this much. And we have to keep our hearts in a place where we understand that no, we are being called to what is natural, what is true, what is right. And this Quran was not sent, and our identities were not given to us so that we may suffer.
Okay. Yeah. I have to take a breath every time you finish to just take in what you just said. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I just want to personally say it's very beautiful to try to ground this moment in a reflection of faith. Like the moment of activism, sometimes we just use the activist language, and then it's very hard to be like, how do we bring this in the Quran? What's the story or the parable that can relate to this moment? So really appreciate that. Okay, I think I have time for two more. So first, I want to go back to your career path. Within research, within policy spaces. And first I want to ask folks here in the room, who here is working in policy, research, or writing? Just to get, okay, so we have a good group of folks in here. And who here is engaging in the social sciences? Okay. I think it's good that not everyone is, by the way. Okay, so now looking at things through this lens, I think a lot of folks who are going down this career path at this moment and going back to, this is a difficult moment.
Yeah.
And I think in your career, you've really, you've engaged in several spaces, from the grassroots to the high top spaces. And we all know that those spaces are extremely difficult to navigate with dignity and holding on to, one, our faith, but also the beliefs and the causes that we carry with our faith in spaces that may not care about those issues and may actually, whether it's implicit or like forcefully try to deny us of bringing our faith and our causes into those spaces. So for those who are engaging in policy, social research, et cetera, going into this moment, do you have advice on how to navigate those spaces, holding that dignity, when we're actually really at a point where we're no longer going to even bury it, And I'm thinking when I bring this up, like Palestine. Like this is a big thing, the Muslim community. It's like, we've gotten into a lot of spaces and let's talk about things. Let's just not, but it doesn't need to be Palestine, but just like walking in with more dignity given the moment that we're in.
It's such a good question because it's always hard when you're the only XYZ in the room, the only woman, the only person of color, the only person wearing hijab, the only Muslim, whatever it is. And so there's a number of things that I would offer as just things to think about. And I go back to the Quran to share a few vignettes from the Quran that have helped me when I'm in a room that I'm intimidated and I feel like everyone else is smarter than me, older than me. Not anymore. Now I'm like the oldest one in the room usually, but before when I was not as old. But just has more experience, has more credentials, has more power, and I'm the only Muslim. Oh, that was a very common thing at the time that I was more involved with policy work. So how did I sort of get through those situations, or how do you enter those rooms and hold your head up high and speak your truth? So the first ayah that I think about in regards to research, and this might sound strange, but it's when Allah is describing to us in the Quran the events of the Day of Judgment, and there are these cataclysmic events of the mountains becoming dust and the earth and the sky rolling up into a scroll. And then one of them, which I thought was always so interesting, is when the girl infant is asked for what crime was she killed. And this ayah always left me with this question, subhanAllah. She was a baby, she was buried, and yet on that day it says she's going to be asked for what crime she was killed. And I would always think, why isn't it saying her father or her society or whoever is responsible for this is asked? And what I finally realized is that on this day, the day of justice, the silenced will be given a voice. Her rage, her indignation, her voice is the one that we're going to hear. Allah's going to give her, the one who was silenced and buried, the chance to talk, the chance to be heard before the King of Kings, the Judge of Judges, right? And so, if you happen to have the opportunity to be in a room to represent your community, or to do research on behalf of people who don't have access to those spaces, what you're doing is you're giving those who don't have a voice a seat at the table. That's what you're there to do. You're there to give those who have been buried and silenced a chance to be heard through rigorous social science research. That is what inspired and motivated me to do good social science research that no one could discount because it wasn't done properly or rigorously enough. And so when I am sitting in that room, I'm not there to pontificate on my own. I'm here to say, according to our scientific surveys, this is what this community is saying it wants, it needs. This is what it's experiencing. We have half of our children we know are bullied for their faith in school. That's a number that was only taken seriously when we did rigorous research around it. When we would say to policymakers in the Department of Education, anywhere else, bullying of Muslim kids is a real problem. Oh, we've never heard anything about it. I don't know what you're talking about. And so it was only when we were able to do rigorous research that this problem, at least not right now, of course, but previous administrations actually took it seriously and had programming around it. So the power of good research is that you bring people into the room with you that weren't invited, that would never have that access. And so that's, I think, something to keep in your heart and your mind. The second thing is I take so much inspiration from the stories of the prophets in the Quran. And one of them is the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. And so this Surah Taha, which is the one that I'm studying right now with my teacher, is about Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, of course. And one thing you learn in that surah is that when he does the prayer, and many of us who do public speaking know this dua, and we say it, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi shrah li sadri, oh my Lord, expand my chest, ease my affairs, untie my tongue so they may understand my words. Did I pray for admiration? No. Did I pray for sounding eloquent and clever? No. All I prayed for is to be given, to ease my affairs, untie my tongue, so that they may do what? Understand my words. So that's all you want to do, is convey the message. So you're in that room to be understood, not to be liked. And that is so freeing. Don't try to get invited another time. If that's your goal, you've already lost. Be in there. And here's the other thing young people will say sometimes to me, I don't want to go because I'm just a token. That's your choice. Maybe that's why you were invited, but you get to choose if you're in there as a token or as the person who's changing the entire conversation by your presence. So walk in there conscious of Allah, as you're performing for exactly an audience of exactly one. So if you're conscious of the gaze of Allah, everyone else's gaze really will fade away, and your goal should be to be understood and not to be admired or liked, and things get much easier.
Thank you for that. And I think that's really helpful for folks walking into rooms where, one, we're at a moment where truth is being denied so widely, even by the high, like institutions like the UN are being denied, So we're really in a battle, and the bringing in the concrete facts and the real historical truth of what is happening, right? I think is very important. And I think too, I think it is while we're seeing this massive shift as a community, we also believe everybody's on the same page, and I think when you're actually engaging with institutions of power, we know there needs to be so much more to be pushed, and we need to push those in power, because actually we need to push those who have the ability to end the things that we want ended, right? Or change the things that we want changed. So really appreciate you still encouraging that. Okay, so getting to our last question. Going back to those charts and us feeling moments like, not feeling hope, feeling exhausted. I know in the work that I do, I've been supporting a lot of the legal cases, like Mahmoud Khalil's case and Rumaisa Ozturk's case with, where I work at Clear, and we're exhausted. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody is also just collectively exhausted, watching what's happening in Gaza happen threefold in front of our eyes as like things are happening right now in this country on top of that. So can you give us a moment of just how do you sustain the work that you do, or sustain yourself, like carrying with the theme of what we are talking about as a woman, as somebody who's doing this work, as someone who's just living in this time?
So first of all, if your heart isn't broken, your eyes aren't open. So first, just, give yourself grace and compassion and understanding, because if we're human, our hearts are broken right now. In the kind of work you're doing, Abir, may Allah give you tawfiq and strength and patience. And in any of the work that feels so overwhelming, you're up against such difficult odds. My advice is this idea from the Quran, where in Surah Al-Anfal, Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam and his companions were told, and in turn all of us, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَإِنَّمَا اللَّهَ رَمَى وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. Thank you for وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. You did not throw when you threw, but instead Allah threw. What was this referring to? It was referring to the Battle of Badr. In the Battle of Badr, the Muslims were outnumbered, we know this, and it was Ramadan. They were outnumbered 3-1. And they were commanded to throw sand, not rocks, sand, at the enemy. And Allah took that sand and had it travel across the valley until it reached the Quraysh lined up in their armor and blinded their eyes so that to facilitate the victory. What does this mean? Was throwing sand, have you ever thrown sand? Sand doesn't go very far. And it doesn't feel like, sand is not something throwing at an enemy that you would think would ever work. And yet they were commanded to do that and they obeyed. Now, could Allah have very easily blown that sand into the eyes of the enemy without anyone doing anything? Of course. But he wanted to gift the Muslims a part to play in the eventual victory that he would grant. Their actions were almost inconsequential, but they did it in obedience as servants of Allah and as a gift to them to be a part of the victory. So what you are doing, Abir, you and your colleagues, is you are throwing sand in the eyes of injustice.
Everyone.
And you keep doing it, even if it feels like, what would sand do?
Yeah. No, I so appreciate that, and I hate being censored, but also like I don't think it's about the work that, because this is work that everyone collectively, everyone in this room I know has shown up on the streets over and over and over. Everyone is exhausted, and I've been sharing with a lot of friends when they ask me, and they, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. We're all exhausted, but also like subhanallah, I texted everyone and I said, but like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is honoring us with this work. SubhanAllah.
Absolutely, and we are all in that. We're all in the trenches throwing sand at justice. That's what we should all be doing.
Yeah. Whew. Okay, well, we like really, Sister Dalia, you're like an institution to us. So we could be talking to you all day. Unfortunately, I do have to cut it. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of you who listened. And inshallah, we'll carry the things that were reflected on in this program as we continue on with the rest of the day. So thank you all, and thank you, Sister Dalia.
Thank you so much.
Exactly. Oh, we can? Okay. Okay. I really wanted to do that because I was like, it's nice to have someone ask. Okay, can we take an audience question before we end? Okay, cool. I see you, Sister. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Barina from Bronx. More like an advice from you. What advice or suggestion would you give for any Muslim or even non-Muslim, because remember they are humans and everyone a human first, how to reconcile or basically try to navigate the gray areas that exist when you are in a struggle between your faith, what you're supposed to do, and in case who's not a Muslim, between what is righteous and then what is required to do. How do you navigate that gray area? Which way do you lean, or do you not do anything, or what do you do? Because for example, what will a divorce attorney who's a practicing Muslim has to side with the law and actually be unjust to one partner? What should that attorney do? Or for a person like me who worked in a bank but was not allowed to wear the hijab at that time, but I needed a job at that time. Or someone who's working in home loans and is actually pushing riba. I met a flight attendant. She was not allowed to wear the hijab on her job.
Mm-hmm.
What are we supposed to do at those times?
Thank you. It's just one, or okay.
Very difficult question, and I don't claim to know the answers to all those questions. I can't give you, this sometimes some of these questions are questions for a faqih who gives you a fatwa, like in this case it's okay, in this case it's not okay. So I'm just going to give you some general principles to think about. We have to believe that Allah is Ar-Razaq. Ar-Razaq means He is the one that gives us rizq. Internalizing that belief means that we are striving constantly to find rizq that is halal. We are praying for it. Even if it's not available right now, at least it must be a goal that we are working towards. And I'll explain one of the most important things about being a person of conscience is having an alignment between your values and your actions. When there is a lack of alignment between those two things, it actually makes you feel so heavy. And managing that dissonance requires so much energy and so much emotional labor and cognitive resources that are being wasted, that could be devoted to actual productivity, of serving humanity. So when you have misalignment in your life, and we all go through periods like that, where our values and our actions for whatever reason are not aligned, do your best, strive to get to a point where there is alignment. Make the changes you need to make and make a lot of dua. But don't sit stagnant in such a situation without really striving to change, because it is so draining on you. It is so draining and heavy on your heart.
Okay. I think that was a perfect way to end, because I think it applies to anyone in any situation, whatever field you're in, trying to strive further to contribute and do what's right at a moment that is very difficult. So thank you again. Thank you, and thank you all for listening. Jazakallah khair for your time and for flying out here and for being with us all day.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And now we shall transition to the next part of the program. Okay.
Give him another round of applause. That question, that was a really beautiful and powerful question. And resonates with a lot of folks in the room.